for watching this video today. Today we're with Travers Smith, a long-standing partner of AS. And just before I start, I just want to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of the Travers Smith Aspiring Solicitors partnership before I introduce Storme, our speaker from Travers Smith today. So gladly, Travers Smith have a high number of AS alumni at the firm at the moment. So there's around 18 alumni, AS alumni with the firm at the moment, 6 of whom are from the well-known commercial awareness competition, Storme herself being one of them, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that soon. Travers Smith have kind of quite an all-round relationship with AS in that, so they have an AS First initiative to support first-year students. That takes place every February, has just finished, but the opening for next year will be open kind of later on in the year. They also deliver a bespoke vacation scheme kind of series of workshops, and those are for members who have reached the vacation scheme for Travers, and then it kind of helps to help those members turn their vacation scheme into a training contract. So that's something we work with Travers Smith candidates in a very bespoke way. So it's a very long-standing and positive relationship, and we have a number of Travers Smith mentors on our new website, which is really positive. So I think if you're wanting to find out more information about Travers after this, please do go onto the website and reach out to those people that would be relevant to you. So I think for those researching Travers Smith, today is a great opportunity to hear from one of their associates about her experience, not only on the vacation scheme and the training contract, but now also life as an NQ. Storme qualified in September, so can speak well about that. So Storme here is a keen advocate for access to the profession from underrepresented groups, and spoke at our culture event in October last year. And I think kind of being there, our members really resonated with the kind of honesty of Storme's story. She'll speak to it soon, but about her as a career changer, her background, and also she'll touch on it a little bit later, but neurodivergence as well. So thank you, Storme, so much for joining us today. It's really great to have you here, and thank you for coming back after speaking at Culture last year. So I'll hand over to you, let you do your introduction, and kind of if you can tell our members a bit about your journey into law from kind of your words, if that's okay.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Sarah. That was a lovely introduction. So my experience was that from a very young age, I always wanted to be a lawyer. Right from when I was a teen, it was a running joke in school that, I was always trying to find my way around some rule in school. And I didn't really know any lawyers. I didn't know anybody really in professional services. So there wasn't really anybody to ask. What I knew about law was things like watching Silks with my mum. And then I remember reading a book about one law firm in particular, and I was like, oh, that must be the law firm that everybody works in. I have to go there. So I spent a lot of my time preparing academically to go down that path. Through like school and things, I was obtaining the grades and things. I think the hiccup came for me when I was in college. I ended up homeless during my second year, so I didn't really go to any of my classes. I just sat my exams. So when I got my results, they weren't meeting the criteria for my firm offers to actually study the law degree. And at that time, there hadn't been anybody that had been speaking to me about what mitigating circumstances were, things like that, that you can resit a year, or that you can reapply, or you can actually talk to you directly and, explain your situation, things like that. So I kind of was like, oh, well, that's it for me. I can't do law. So I went on quite a long detour in my journey at that point. I tried doing psychology, dropped out after a semester, but I was there at all the, AS events and cheerleading and things like that. I then went and did English literature and professional and creative writing. I dropped out of that after 2 years because I was like, actually, I don't want to do journalism or anything like that. And I always wanted to do law. I think, again, at that point when I was going through that process of trying things and then, dropping out of things, trying something else, again, there wasn't anybody to explain to me the process. I didn't know about the fact that actually you can do a conversion from a non-law degree to be able to get into law and things like that. And I think had I had that information, that might have been something I'd done, where I thought, actually, I can finish my English degree and then still take that path. So at that point, when I dropped out of uni the second time, I just decided that I was just going to start working. I'd been doing youth work for a lot of time. I started working as a PA for a finance director. And it was during that time that she was the one that actually turned around and said to me, like, what do I actually want to do with my life? And I was like, well, I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I think it was her encouragement that actually helped me start, because she was basically just like, go and do that, I'll sponsor your law degree. And she did. So I pretty much signed up for BPP University on the Monday, was enrolled by the next week, and started my law degree part-time for 5 years. So that was kind of like my journey into actually starting the academic piece and actually going into that. And then for me, it was a case of actually, because I was working full-time while I was studying, trying to find out actually, what is this law thing? How do I get into it? What is a training contract?
Yeah. Did you stay at the PA job whilst did you continue there with the person?
Yes, I did.
To you?
Yes, I did. I still worked for her, I think, for at least another 2 years after that before she left. And then I moved on to another place where, again, the manager there was very supportive. I said to him when I took the job, I need a day off to study. And he said, absolutely fine. But I think about 90% of the team were lawyers at the time, and they were all very supportive in making sure that I could finish that. So when it came to the actual process, when I was trying to figure out what is a training contract, how do you get one, you know, who do I need to speak to, what do I need to know to be able to get this kind of job, I came across different organizations, one of them being Aspiring Solicitors, and it was one of the first that I signed up with. And that kind of gave me the exposure into actually what law firms do, how they do it, how they go about recruiting and things like that. So for a long time, I put off applying completely, because I always felt like my profile wasn't there. I didn't have necessarily the grades, whatever. And I was never really weighing up against my experience of, I'd been working for, 10 years at this point in different roles, some of them quite senior, working with quite senior levels of people. But I was always thinking, I don't have, this particular type of experience. I don't have this particular kind of access. I'm not ready. During that time, I think it was 2017, Aspiring Solicitors, I think, was on maybe their second or third year of the commercial awareness competition. And I saw it and I was like, you know what? Let me just sign up for that, because I don't really know what commercial awareness is in the way that it's being talked about. And I just thought, you know what? I don't know what's going to come of it, but it's some kind of exposure and it will be something good to put on my CV. And for me, it was a very good experience. It was very tough, very, very tough. And I think if it hadn't been for the team that I had entered the competition with, I probably had been like, yeah, I'm not doing this. But they were very supportive. We worked together really well. Unfortunately for me, I got through to the final. I did my semi-final at Travers Smith, where I ended up with my training contract. And after I did the final, I got 2 offers from 2 of the sponsoring firms, one of them being Travers Smith, to do vacation schemes with the firms. So I accepted those. After I did those, I got my offer with Travers Smith and I accepted, and that's how I got here today. But I think there was quite a long journey in between that, quite a lot of ups and downs and different inroads before I was actually able to get on the path where I was like, oh, I'm back to where I wanted to be.
I think it's funny how things happen, isn't it? And it's perhaps if that person at your first PA job hadn't kind of encouraged it, it sounded like you were going to go back to it anyway, but it sounded she was very kind of influential in helping you get there, and also the jobs being supportive of you being off and studying, because just wanted to touch on that a little bit too, in terms of the studying a law degree whilst working full time. How was that for you?
It was extremely difficult, and I think looking back at it now, it's not something that I would willingly do again. And I say it is doable. People do it all of the time, but I found that the personal sacrifice was extremely high. It meant missing out on a lot of, events, birthdays, celebrations, baby showers, things like that, holidays with friends and things like that, because the exam times fell at times where I couldn't go. And I found it really tough just to find the balance between, doing a full-time job and then in the evening still finding the energy to go and study. And I was in a position where, where I'm a single person with no children. So it wasn't even like I then had to go home and then, raise a family as well. I have so much respect for students that are in that position, because I found it incredibly difficult. And it was my saving grace that I had such supportive management teams, because I think it could have been very difficult if I was made always to take annual leave to, to study or do exams, or that I'm using up my annual leave to, study, as opposed to actually being able to take a break from the job, which is what it's there for. So I think it was definitely a challenge. I'm not one of those people that'll be like, oh, it was absolutely worth it. I think there were better ways I could have done it. But I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, and I didn't know that there were other ways that I could have done it. So I did what I had to do at the time, and fortunately I was successful.
Yeah, and I think that's true as well. And I think that's certainly when you spoke at Culture, obviously hearing your story, your success story at that event, it was the honesty and just being honest, it was really tough, and you did have to make sacrifice. And I think that's really important for our listeners to hear. Just kind of moving on to kind of your experience with the vacation scheme. So obviously, following the commercial awareness competition experience, you obviously secured the vacation scheme. And what was your kind of experience on that? And interested to kind of know what you thought it would be like versus kind of what it was actually like, a little bit there.
Yeah, it was interesting because the other vaccine I got was with an American firm, and immediately once I'd done the 2 vacation schemes, you could see the difference, like culture-wise, in terms of how the firms operate. And I think what was different for me with Travers Smith was that I'd enjoyed the first vacation scheme I had done. I had a really good time there. It had originally been one of the firms I'd been looking at and had quite a good interest in. But I think what was different for me about Travers was the structure of the scheme. So at the time when I did it, it was 2 weeks in person, and you sat in 2 different departments during the week. During that process, they would have specific assessments that they would give you, and you'd have specific sessions, with DR or corporate or things like that, about different tasks that you'd have to do. So one of our tasks, for example, was a negotiation task where we had to, basically negotiate with the other side on a particular matter and negotiate in terms on a contract, things like that. And we had sessions where we then also sat within the departments and actually did actual department work as well. And I think it was that balance of actually having these scheduled sessions where you were practicing what it would have been like to practice law at Travers Smith, because all of the tasks that we'd done were based on deals that Travers had actually worked on. So we had these scenarios to work from. We then worked from those scenarios, and then we were actually able to find out actually what actually happened on that scenario would work for in real life. And I liked the fact that it felt practical and hands-on and felt less theoretical than some of the other stuff I'd done on my other vac scheme. And I think also the interest I think that people I worked with on the vac scheme had in me as an individual also felt quite affirming as well. They were quite interested to know, what had I done before? Why did I do that? Why did I change to law? What happened in between? And that kind of thing. And it didn't feel that I was trying to be forced to be a particular type of lawyer to be able to fit in at Travers Smith. So I think that for me was what sold it, in terms of feeling like if I was to train there, that would be somewhere where I could get the kind of training that suits the way I like to learn, and the way I like to work. So for me, it was more about actually understanding what do I need from a training perspective for myself, and where do I feel like I would best get that. And for me at the time, between the 2 vac schemes I had, it was Travers Smith. But I thoroughly enjoyed my other vac scheme. I had a really good time, and I have associates there now. So it's not that there was anything wrong with the other vac scheme. It was just that one was more suited to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happened, kind of, you finished your 2 weeks, what happened after that? How did you hear about the offer?
So with Travers, what we had to do was basically resubmit the application, just to basically confirm that we still had the interest in getting an offer. So after I'd done that, I think it was a couple of weeks before we heard back, because I did the summer vacation scheme, and I think I did the last one. So yeah, it was a couple of weeks before we heard back. I think it was sometime at the end of August. And just got a phone call from one of the partners. I got called by Heather Gagan, who was in DR, just basically giving the news. But it was, I think, quite overwhelming. And I think that was more in terms of finally feeling like, taking me, 6 or 7, 8 years to basically get through all of the academics, get through the process, to be able to get that offer, that it felt like, okay, at least it wasn't for nothing. At least all of those sacrifices hadn't been to get a no at the end of it. And I think, so I cried at that point. I was just like, Heather, I'll call you back. And then I called back and accepted. But yeah, I think it was definitely one of those things where I was like, okay, do you know what? It was hard, but you've done it.
Worth it. And can remember that moment now, where you were and what your reaction was.
Very distinctly.
Who gave you that phone call.
Yeah.
And moving on to the kind of training contract, so keen to hear your experience of the kind of seats you rotated to, and also I know about the kind of the room sharing culture. I think that's really important. It's something definitely our members would like to hear about. So can you kind of touch on that, your experience with the training contract?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started my training contract during lockdown. So it wasn't until after the first year that we were actually able to be in the office properly. Fortunately, I had done some paralegaling with Travers a few months earlier, so I'd had the benefit of actually sitting in the room and actually seeing what that room sharing aspect looked like. And that was one of the things that actually drew me to Travers, because I like the idea of being able to sit with different levels of people and learn from all those different levels of people. So we share a room with the partner, senior associate, junior associate, sometimes a paralegal as well. And it was really good to be able to see how they all work together, see how the junior lawyers can turn around and ask the senior lawyers questions, that there is a hierarchy because it's a law firm, but it didn't feel hierarchical in that you can go and speak to anybody if you had kind of questions about the work that you were doing. And I liked that aspect. I liked being able to overhear, conversations that were being had, especially at the partner and senior associate level, and how they actually dealt with both their junior lawyers and also their clients, and then lawyers on the other side, and actually seeing how they, phrase things in a conversation or draft things in an email and things like that. And I found that was very helpful. For the training contract itself, I think it was quite a challenge starting in lockdown, because you didn't get that same aspect of, being able to socialize within the firm, being able to get to know people in the same way that you can when you just pass them in the office. So I think it was difficult. I think the firm did well in terms of trying to make people feel connected. So making sure that the trainees were checked in on, scheduling calls with different lawyers within the departments that they were working with, just so that they had someone to check in with or speak to on a social basis. So that was really helpful. So actually being able to go back into the office more towards the second half of my training contract, that was really helpful to actually just being in the office. I think in between that, and I know we'll touch on it shortly, that's when my issues with neurodivergence started to actually appear for me. And I think the room sharing aspect, that's where suddenly I felt the dual part of it, where I was like, actually, this is a really great experience, but actually this wreaks havoc for the way I can focus and concentrate. So there's been that balance of trying to actually be like, okay, how do I work effectively in the office and also still get my work done in this environment? But I think being able to rotate through different seats. So I did commercial as my first seat. I did corporate CME as my second seat, which is corporate mergers and acquisitions in equity capital markets. I then did finance, which is where I've now qualified. And then I did DR. And in those choices, for me, it's about keeping things as broad as possible. I think it's quite amusing that I actually ended up qualifying into finance, because when I told that's where I was going, I was like, oh God, does everybody hate me? I cannot do finance. Numbers are not my thing. Turns out it wasn't numbers at all, which was helpful. Yeah. But it was interesting to find out that actually when I came in, I thought I wanted to be a litigator. I thought that was the kind of where I was. That seemed to be the kind of area I was interested in going through school and college and things like that. But actually when I sat down to do it, the way it was practiced just didn't suit me. It was, sitting on a case for 10, 20 years, too long for me. I liked the speed of transactional work. I liked that you could do something, execute it and get rid of it. I then liked the fact that, it's quite process driven. Once you've learned the process, you can kind of knock things out quite quickly and then start to develop more expertise in very particular things. So I think the training contract itself was very helpful to actually help me discover that, because I think if I'd gone to another firm that was maybe more litigation focused, I might have realized, oh my God, that's a mistake, because actually when I was sitting there doing that kind of work, it wasn't for me at all.
Interesting. And I suppose it's a bit like you just you didn't know what to expect, and really had your sight set on something, and turns out something that you didn't expect was where you've ended up. So you touched on there a little bit on neurodivergence. I know kind of you were assessed throughout your training contract for that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, about how you kind of made the firm aware of it, how they supported you, and kind of the adjustments you've had? Because I know a little bit, we've spoken about that before. So
so it was probably during my first seat, the first 6 months, where I noticed that I was finding certain things difficult. It was around processing information, especially in things like training sessions where, I'm being spoken at, I'm being given new information, and it's like my brain was shutting down. And it was also in terms of things like sending out emails and seeing that sometimes I could miss out entire words in a sentence, but every time I read that sentence back before I sent it, it was there for me, but once I sent it afterwards, I realized it was missing. And in particular with the comprehension point, I think it was a struggle because I'd been used to working at quite a high level, working with directors and executives and things like that. So I knew it wasn't that I didn't understand things, but that there was like a gap that I couldn't cross. So I'd originally spoken to our L&D manager, Rachel, about it. And at that time, obviously, it was COVID, just started a new job, I just moved to a new house. We were like, there could be a whole host of reasons why, I'm having this issue. So we were like, let's keep an eye on it and see what happens. When I was in my second seat, I was in corporate and it was moving very quickly. It was on quite an intense deal. And I noticed it again there. And also it was things like attention management. So where in this deal it was so busy, we were getting almost an email a minute. It was like my brain couldn't keep up with what needed to be done, where things were and what was happening. And again, I knew this wasn't that I couldn't manage multiple streams of work because I've done that in multiple roles. There was something very specific. So I spoke to the partner I was sitting with at the time, and he was very supportive because I think it was twofold. One, that I was noticing it for myself, and I was like, there's something here that needs to be looked at and addressed, and I don't know what it is, but I need support with it. But also the fact that I had the confidence to then flag it to my supervisor. And I think that was helpful because, we get reviews throughout our training contract. You get review during the middle of your seat, you get review at the end of your seat. And I think there'd been feedback from the associates that there was an issue. Some of them didn't know what it was. Some of them, were guessing that maybe it was, being overwhelmed, for example, with email activity. So when I'd had that conversation with my partner, I was like, that's absolutely not the case. I've dealt with far more emails. That's not the issue here. And he was glad I raised it because, for him, he'd been working with me, and he said, some of the feedback I'm getting, I don't understand because I've worked with you, so I'm not seeing what the issue is here. So he was like, let's get this looked at. And it just so happened that, there was this, I guess, thing on TikTok where it suddenly blew up that a lot of people were getting diagnosed, for example, with ADHD. And when they were doing these videos about how their brain works and what it looks like on a typical day, I was like, that's me. That's actually what it sounds like for me. So I spoke to them about getting that assessment just to see, like, is there something within that? And when we did that process, I ended up getting tested for quite a few different things, and that it came back that I also had dyslexia and dyspraxia as well, which was quite interesting to me because I didn't know much about dyslexia at the time. So when they said, oh, you also have dyslexia, I was like, oh, but I've never really had a problem with, my English reading and writing and things like that. And they've said, oh, no, they also comprises things like, comprehension, which is the thing I had actually been struggling with. So it was going through that process, and it took quite a while to get the assessments, to get the feedback, to get the reviews and whatever. But that was very helpful for me to be able to understand that what was actually impacting me was the way that trainees have to work. So we're at the bottom of the chain. We get given work and we get told when to do it and what we need to be done and when someone else needs it back by. That was very different for me, where I'd come from environments where I was actually the one in charge. I was the one delegating work. So anytime there was a task that I knew would make my brain go AWOL, I would delegate it to a different member of my team and pick up their work instead, and would switch things around like that. So I'd always play to people's strengths. In this kind of role, there wasn't as much ability to do that. You get given the work that you need to do, and that's kind of it. You're the one that has to do it. So it was now about me looking at, okay, when I get this work, how do I go about doing it? How do I communicate with the person about how I need to be able to do it and what information I need beforehand before I can do it, and things like that. So in going through that process, it then meant sitting down with HR as well and basically saying to them, like, this is what's come out of these assessments, and looking at adjustments. So I think what was the most impactful was that, one, I had a very supportive team, and when I was moving through my seats, I had very supportive partners that I was sitting with that were basically like, what is it that you need and how do we make it work? It was also me being solution focused and saying, okay, how does your department work? How does it run? Because all the departments have their own particular ways of doing things. Some work earlier, some work later. Transactional departments, we tend to work late quite a lot. Whereas when I was in DR, actually it was more early starts because we had court deadlines for 4 p.m. So there was variations and things like that. So it was about me saying, okay, if I need a later start, for example, this is the time I can start working from home. I then need a break between that to be able to come into the office after rush hour to be able to come in and work again, things like that. But saying, this is what I need and this is how I think it can work. What do you think? And then saying, is there anything else that you feel you might be able to offer support-wise, or that you think would help, particularly with the kind of work that I'll be getting, that you think I should be aware of, that we can look at, adjustments for as well if they're necessary. And I think it was that two-way collaboration process that has actually made it easier for me to be able to go through my training contract, the remainder of it, with the adjustments I needed, which meant I could then work much more effectively. Because definitely there were times where, I was working to very late, but that wasn't because I needed to be all the time. Often that was because the work I'd been given, I would hit a break in the day, I'd hit a wall where I was like, I actually can't concentrate enough to do this. So I'd have to take a break, and then it would mean I was working much later than I needed to be, which caused concern for the people I was sitting with. So there was that kind of process, but I think it is very much about, one, I think came with age and experience. I have the confidence to say, there is an issue here, can you help me address it? this is the support I need, this is how I think it can work, what do you think? But also just understanding that if I didn't do those things, it's only me that's going to be suffering. So for me, it was more of an advantage to just
absolutely.
sit down with people and discuss it.
Absolutely. And I think you make a good point there about confidence in terms of, we actually just had our ability event last week, and there was a huge point around, do I disclose, and what point do I disclose, and things, but very much kind of self-directing, you being the expert on you and what you need, and coming to the firm and saying, I've noted this in myself, others have too, how can you support me? But equally interesting how the different departments support, adjustments differ, because their working day differs and things. So it sounds to me that, they were very supportive, both in terms of you kind of raising it, but not, as well as kind of working together collaboratively to make the adjustments and continue to make them as you change.
Yeah.
So just moving on now, I'm just conscious of time, kind of to now life as an NQ, and I think I know you've qualified in September, and also into the kind of area that you didn't think you would do. So can you kind of share some tips perhaps for our members from transitioning from that kind of training contract stage to an associate, and how that was for you?
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting for me in that sometimes the jump can feel quite large, I think, from going from a trainee to an associate. And I think that's because, I think most associates will say, on Friday, your email signature says trainee, on Monday it says associate, which now means people think you're going to know what you're talking about. So there is that element, I think, where for me, I went through that process of, oh my God, what happens if I get something wrong now? Someone's just not going to give me any grace because they must assume I know what I'm talking about because it says associate in my title. And there was a part of me that was like, oh no, what should I know now? There's a trainee sitting in my room. They're going to be asking me questions. What if I don't know them? Should I have known this stuff? Should I have been asking this stuff at trainee level? So there was that process of adjustment of just going, actually, you're still learning. You are just an NQ, and that's absolutely fine. And people know that you're working with, and people who don't know that, who are working opposite you, don't need to. You have the support within the firm, and if you do get things wrong, it won't most of the time be the end of the world. So I think that took some time for me to just adjust to, and I don't think there was really anything anybody could have said that would have made that different for me. It was just a process I had to go through to be like, actually, this is fine. It's not much different to what I was doing on Friday. My title just says associate now. I think what was a challenge for me, and I think it was twofold. In one, that as a trainee, you don't always get much opportunity to delegate. We have paralegals within our team that we work quite closely with, and we can delegate to them as well. But I think, especially for me, when I was going through my training contract, it was always important for me to make sure I'd done something a few times before I thought about delegating it, just so I understood it and I knew what I was doing. Because I was of the opinion, and associates I'd worked with said, if I delegate something down and it comes back, how will I be able to check if it's correct if I don't know how to do it myself? So that process I'd gone through, but what I hadn't thought about is actually at the associate level, when you are working with a trainee and you're delegating down, you've got a two-way work stream. You've got one where you're sending work down to your trainee to do, and it's coming back up and you've got to check it. You've got the other where you're actually still getting work from your, junior and senior associates and partner. And you've got to send that work back up. You've got to keep an eye on where both sets of work streams are. And I think it wasn't something that I hadn't done before, but I think it was just different for me in terms of the stages in which that work comes through and where it sits and who it sits with at each particular time. So I found that a challenge in the beginning. And I think especially because of my neurodiversity, one of my issues is that, out of sight, out of mind. So once I've delegated something down, I have to go through a continuous process of reminding myself of where is work, who is it with, where is it now and what time is it coming back, kind of thing. Because otherwise I'll be like, oh, I've sent a piece of work down, and then my associate will be like, oh, where are we with this? And I'll be like, I completely forgot about this. Let me go and find out where it is. And I didn't want to be in that position. So I think that has been the biggest challenge. And then I think, again, it's another confidence point in fact of you won't know things that you don't know. And a trainee may very well ask you a question that you do not know the answer to. And it is just saying, actually, I don't know the answer to that. Let's go and find out together. So I think those have been the kind of biggest jumps for me in terms of going from trainee to associate, because before nobody expected me to know, but now there is someone who thinks I might know. And it's just about being comfortable with the fact that I won't always know, but I can always do my best.
Yeah, I think that's really important as well. Like that title change must feel different, almost like as you say, it happens overnight, but it's still very much a learning curve. And am I right in thinking that you then rejoined the training that you did in your different seats with the trainees. Is that right, to sort of reaffirm it?
Yeah, so particularly within our teams here, because the trainees rotate every 6 months, we have the training running for trainees every 6 months. So all of the NQs in our team basically were rotated back into the trainee sessions once they rejoin the department. We go through those sessions. It's more like a refamiliarization process, because a lot of these things we might have done already, but it might have been 2 or 3 seats ago that we've done it. So it's kind of that reacclimatizing. And then we have a lot of associate training, level training as well, where we can actually just learn to understand the documents that we actually deal with on a day-to-day basis. So there is a lot of kind of training and support and education in that way. And then there's a lot of self-directed learning where, if you don't know something, you actually go find out and ask. Or if you feel like you want to get experience in something, just speaking to the people you're working with and say, I haven't worked on this kind of document yet. Is there an opportunity for me to do that? And pretty much often there always is. So I think there is that balance of actually just being more structured and saying, okay, what is it that I feel like I should know? Or talking to the partner and senior associates and basically saying, what do you think I should be getting experience in at this point? And then going and getting that experience, and they will assign you matters to support that process as well.
Yeah, that's really positive. Just before we close, I just want to kind of now, obviously been at the firm 2.5 years now, and I think it's a unique opportunity for us to speak to somebody who's so newly qualified. Just kind of looking back to that 2.5 years, your reflections as how you feel part of Travers. Obviously you joined the vacation scheme, then it was very much kind of working in lockdown and then coming back. So how you feel as part, being part of the Travers team, and kind of the firm's commitment, very much for our diverse membership, watching their commitment and continued commitment to diversity from the inside. We've heard about it from, the support you've received from neurodivergence, but you perhaps as a career changer coming into this, a slightly different way to perhaps others. Can you kind of reflect on that before we finish?
Yeah, so I think my personal experience, especially, going from the VAC scheme to associate, has been a very good one. I found a very good support with the teams and people that I've been working with. And I found that it has been a dual process of collaboration where, I might raise something and then I will get a response, or someone might raise something to me and I can respond to that, which I think has been very helpful. In terms of the diversity piece, I think, especially for someone like me who is a career changer, who's come from, state school background, etc., I found that hasn't hindered my particular journey. And I think that the people that I have worked with have always found, that of interest and are quite keen to hear my perspective and things like that. So there are a lot of internal conversations about different strands of diversity within the firm. And I think there is quite a lot of appetite within the partnership who generally, want to address these issues and make sure that we are making it as much of an inclusive workplace as possible. I think there are issues across the city, and I don't think Travers is an exception. So I think there is still a long way to go generally. But at this stage, I'm comfortable where I am. And I think I've made the right choice for my training and qualification.
That's really positive. Thank you. That's nice to end on. So thank you so much for joining today and for sharing kind of your journey. It's certainly covered a lot, and I'm sure there'll be questions kind of from members once the video is shared. So for anyone watching, if you want to find out more about Travers, thank you for watching, but kind of look on their website, look on the AS website about their commitment to diversity, and obviously keep an eye out for kind of their website and socials as well as ours for kind of opportunities for the training contract in the future, as well as initiatives like the AS First piece and the vacation scheme AS initiative that I mentioned earlier on. So thank you so much, Storme, for joining.
Thank you,
I really appreciate it, and thank you everyone for watching.